In this episode of The Quite Frankly Show, I talk about growth, differentiation, and organizational buy-in. Check it out.
It's now time for The Quite Frankly Show.
Hey everybody, thanks for joining. This is Frank Cowell. This is The Quite Frankly Show. Today we have a few questions on deck around growth, differentiation, and getting organizational buy-in. Corey, what do we have?
Daniel Travers asks, how do we set meaningful business goals and objectives and encourage ownership of them across an organization?
David, great question. So I would say, this really has to start top down in the company. So if you haven't yet defined organizationally, like where you're going from a vision standpoint, and if you haven't made sure that every single person in your company knows that vision and where the company's going, I would start there. The vision has to be clearly articulated, so much so that there's no question about where you're going. Now, as with most vision statements, you may not get to that place and have it look 100% identical to that vision statement, but it paints enough of a picture to where it becomes clear for everyone in the organization where you're going and why you're going there. There's a gentleman named Cameron Herold that talks about this process called a vivid vision. I would highly recommend you look into it as a way to help you craft that vision. That would be, I think, the first thing. The second thing I would do is then work that vision backwards and understand what has to happen in 3 years and then what has to happen in 1 year in terms of milestones to be on a journey towards that vision. And when you break it down, you're going to get to your 1 year and it's going to be really clear the one thing that you should be focusing on as an organization this year. And so you have to get the organization rallied around that one thing or that set of just a very few things and make it very clear to everyone in the organization why those are the milestones this year and why it's going to take an organizational wide effort to make it happen. You then want to chunk that backwards into quarterly, right? So then quarterly, you're going to have the one thing that you'll be working on, which, by the way, you should read the book called The One Thing, and that'll help you articulate or come up with exactly what I'm telling you. In fact, in that book, I forget the gentleman's name who wrote that, but he talks about this thing called the clarifying question. And the clarifying question is, what's the one thing that we should be working on right now such that everything else towards our vision is easier or unnecessary as a result of working on one thing right now. And so by asking that question, that will continue to bring clarity to what you should be working on. Once you have that kind of clarity, what you want to do is make sure that every single person in the organization has their own one thing, or in the system called EOS, the Entrepreneurial Operating System, they call those ROCs, Scaling Up by Verne Harnish, ROCs, in that system as well. So that way every person's ROC aligns towards that one thing. It aligns towards those milestones that build towards the vision, right? And so along the way, you're going to have the things you're working on this year, and then you got your vision, which is, a long ways out. Like in between, you can have a rough idea of what needs to happen, but don't get too hung up on that, because as you go through time, it's very evolutionary and iterative. So you may get 1 year down the road and realize a certain milestone you had for 3 years out just is irrelevant, doesn't need to happen anymore, and that's okay. But the key thing is you define the vision and then 3 and 1 year kind of goals and milestones, and then what are the rocks to start making that happen and making sure everyone in the organization has rocks that build towards that one thing. So, in that, again, I'll recap, read the book, The One Thing, get either traction or scaling up, and you really help define that clarity. Look into Cameron Herold. He's got, again, vivid vision. If you do that kind of work and make sure that everyone on the team is crystal clear on those milestones and the vision, you're going to be in great shape.
Sarah Davis says, I'm currently working in a very competitive space. What are some ways that my brand can differentiate from the competition?
So many new competitors, Sarah. What do we do? Competitors are a pain in the ass, aren't they? Wouldn't it be nice if we just lived in a world where there was no competition and there was only us? I'd love that, right, Corey? But sadly, that's not the case. So, listen, I find there's two ways to look at this. One way is I would really focus less on competition, because at the end of the day, there might be one competitor, there might be 1,000 competitors. It really, spend less time on focusing on your competitors and spend more time focusing on your own differentiation and your value that you bring to your customers. So let's go down that path for a moment. So when we talk about value and differentiation, what I find is the reason companies often struggle to create differentiation is because they haven't lasered in on who their customer is, and they haven't lasered in on the problem that they're solving for that customer. And what I mean by that is if you truly know the problem you're solving and you understand the outcome that your customer wants, the language that you'll use and the approach that you'll take with your customers and the marketplace in general will radically change. You'll go from thinking about scope and ultimately really just selling hands to focusing on outcomes and selling outcomes to your clients and solving those common challenges that your customer at large has, instead of obsessing on each individual little situation. And when you start thinking that way and start thinking, what is our target customer experience such that we solve it in a really unique, great way? And what is that journey that we take people on to solve that problem in a unique way? And how can we brand that journey? How can we brand that process? And by process, I don't mean your work process. I'm not talking about your execution process where you've got audit, discovery, design, I'm not talking about the work process. You absolutely should have execution process, for sure. And at a certain point in time, it's okay to expose that to your prospect or your customer. I'm talking about a journey such that if you were to teach your customer how to accomplish the outcome they want, it would be educational. It would be instructing them on what they need to do at a high level to get to their outcome. When you can put that together in a way that tells a really exciting and interesting story, and you can brand it, and you can put out information and assets around that journey, whatever it may be, or framework, whatever it is, now you're going to start creating differentiation in the marketplace, and you're going to start having different conversations, because the conversations you're going to have are going to be about outcomes, not hands, not scope. In fact, very much so, the way I sell is I don't talk about details of scope until someone has actually said yes to me. And the reason I'm able to do that is because we focus on journey and we focus on outcome. We focus on approach. We focus on big picture milestones and big picture timelines and high level investment costs. We don't get into the weeds because at that stage, it's just not important. So I would just challenge you to look at what you're selling and get a better handle on what it is you're actually selling. Because if you're experiencing those challenges of maybe being commoditized by competition, chances are you're selling hands, or you're selling scope, or you're selling the widgets and the things, instead of understanding the outcome that your customer really and truly wants.
David Greenmore asks, what do you find to be the top 3 inhibitors to business growth?
Hey Dan, good question. There are a lot of things that I could probably rattle off, but if you're going to pressure me for just 3, here's what I would say the top 3 are. One, I would say that the entrepreneur, the individual that started the business, or a group of individuals, those people, that person, are often the bottleneck to growth, because oftentimes the business is about them. It's about their creative output. It's about their idea, the big idea, right? It's about them being the rock star salesperson. Whatever it is, they're often the bottleneck to growth, because what they don't realize is that it's got to be about more than just them if they truly want to scale and take things to the next level. There's got to be other people that come in and start owning other areas of the business. As the entrepreneur, it's not your job to have all the right answers. As the great Verne Harnish says, you have to ask the right questions of the right people. That's your job as an entrepreneur if you want to scale and take things to the next level. So I find, number one, the entrepreneur themselves is often a big inhibitor to growth. The second thing I would find is that companies are trying to do too much. They're trying to be all things to all people, and there's a severe lack of focus within the organization. And so at any given time, if clients or customers can come in and no two orders are the same, or we're saying yes to things that aren't well planned out, and we don't even have focus and depth in one given area, it just becomes chaos. And that chaos is just not a fun place to be, especially in a world today where every single person is overran and overwhelmed with information and technology, and things are in our face 24/7. We need our workplaces to be sanctuaries. We need our workplaces to be the place that provides consistency, that gives us the fulfillment that we so desperately need as human beings. And that's being lost today because our world is fast, messy, and chaotic. But it's incumbent upon organizations to focus and figure those things out. And I would say the third thing is organizations underfund their acquisition goals. I can't tell you how many times I talk to an organization that makes big claims like, this year we're going to grow 100% over last year. And then when I start poking around and investigating, the plan essentially boils down to what I would paraphrase as, we're just going to sell better, because there is no real plan for how they're going to grow 100% year over year. They're just going to try harder. And when I look into things, I find that the marketing budget has increased maybe 5%, 10%, or maybe it hasn't even increased at all. And this is a huge problem, because if you want to grow 100% year over year and you don't increase your marketing budget 100% also, you are not going to hit your growth goals, right? Like, this whole idea comes down to just hoping we do better to hit our growth goals. And in fact, I find businesses aren't even doing some very simple business math to understand what their growth investment needs to be year over year. So for example, if you look at your acceptable cost of customer acquisition and just simply multiply that out over the increased number of customers that you need to get to meet your growth goal, and come up with a number, and if you're not funding it based on, if you're not at least investing around that number, it just seems crazy to me to think that you're actually going to hit your growth goals. As the saying goes, he or she that can afford to spend the most to acquire a customer wins. That is very, very true. And so as organizations, we need to stop underfunding acquisition. In fact, we need to change our mindset from what's the least I can spend in marketing to what's the most I can spend in marketing. When we can take a what's the most kind of mentality, I promise you that acquisition, those growth goals will happen, but we have to stop speaking out of two sides of our mouth. We want to grow, but we're not going to fund the kinds of activities that we know drive acquisition in the marketplace. We have to back it up with a commitment of time, people, resources, and guess what? Money, right? So that's what I find to be the third biggest thing is, stop underfunding your acquisition. Hey everybody, thanks for joining me for this episode of the Quite Frankly Show. If you have a question you'd like me to answer in a future episode, drop your comment below. We'll see you soon.